And now I'd like to introduce our host, Caryn Keppler, partner at Pierro, Connor & Strauss. Hi, Caryn.
Hi, Beth. Thank you. Please join. I'm very happy to have this distinguished panel for this wonderful webinar that we're going to put on. We have, besides myself, Rebecca Lcokwood, who is the Senior Vice President and Director of Business Development for the Fiduciary Client Group at Sotheby's. Rebecca is based in New York City, and she is an attorney and a graduate of New York Law School. We also have Colin Stair, the president and founder of Stair Galleries, which is based in Hudson, New York, and Hotz, co-founder of Lobus, which is our new essential infrastructure allowing owners, creators, and advisors to manage their assets in the 21st century with integrations for financial planning, insurance, lending, and all the tools that are necessary to manage your art collection. She graduated with her MBA from Yale University. And now I'm going to introduce Rebecca for a short little introduction on where we are in the art market today.
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to be joining you today. And I hope that our panel provides some useful insights into the unique issues that might impact you and your clients who own art or other valuable tangibles. So it obviously goes without saying that so much of the world has changed in the last year, and the art world is no different. It has changed dramatically over the course of the last 12 months. And while we couldn't have predicted COVID, I would say that many of the trends that we've seen have evidenced themselves in different ways in the year prior. So many of the advancements in technology that we saw from March of 2020 to now that have allowed us to weather the period somewhat successfully were already visible increasingly in 2019, and they simply accelerated due to COVID. So I think it evidences not only a resilience in the art market and the market for rare and valuable tangibles, but excitingly, it's also marked an expansion of the art market into completely new territories. For the first time, we're seeing newer and younger participants. So quite exciting from our perspective at the auction house. So just to quickly break down, I think it'd be helpful for us just to identify the different areas in which transactions take place in the art market. And I can talk about how they've changed very quickly. The first of which are sales at auction, which Colin and I can speak to. These were traditionally held in a live format with an auctioneer, with a gavel at a rostrum in the front of a room filled with people, with specialists bidding from all over the world. That has obviously changed dramatically over the course of the last year. Due to COVID, all the live sales that were scheduled to be conducted starting last spring were converted to online only sales or live streamed sales, which perhaps some of you have attended or participated in. In addition to that, private sales, which were a big part of the market and conducted by lots of galleries and dealers and increasingly us auction houses. Those sales were somewhat halted at the start of COVID, but have increasingly picked up due to liquidity needs for clients. It's important to note that those have been facilitated in great part by advances in technology like virtual reality. So folks can now view works online. There's also options now to augment reality and project works into your own home. So without going to visit a gallery, you can pretend you're either viewing them in your house or walking through the gallery virtually. So a lot of advancement technology there to go and serve in place of the experience of viewing a work of art real time. And then another major part of the art market, which in the early 2000s was the way to view art fairs, which obviously ceased to exist, at least in a real sense, in 2020. Many of those now converted to online viewing room experiences for clients, but we'll see whether or not the trend that was leading into 2020, that these were such a big part of the market, will continue or revive in years from now. I don't know how eager folks are to get onto planes and travel to large convention centers to be with others, so we'll see what happens there. But I think that it's important to note there has been really a change in the market, dictated mostly during COVID by supply. The art market really is a supply-based market. And we did see incredibly pent-up demand, but lots of sellers who were reticent to dip their toe into the market during COVID without really knowing what the appetite would be. Over the past 4 months or 5 months, we've really seen an uptick in high value sales. I think it's a very important thing to note that there is deep appetite for expensive works and also for lower value work. So Colin and I can both speak to items selling in the $5,000 to $50,000 range. And what's most exciting for that area of the market is the advent of online sales, which have really flourished for that price point. And we've seen increased competition. At Sotheby's, I can say that over 40% of our buyers last year participating in online sales were completely new to Sotheby's. So it's really untapped, I think, huge uncharted waters in the art market. And we're very excited, I would say, for what the future might hold now that we've begun to really deploy these new technologies and help our clients to experience art in new ways.
Rebecca, Sotheby's recently had a sale of NFTs.
We did.
Yes. Could
Yes,
you
it's
explain to
the
everybody
area.
what exactly a non-fungible token is?
Yes. So it's also the most recent trend, which has started to really kick off in the last few months. NFTs are non-fungible tokens, which are unique files that live in a blockchain. And we're able to verify the ownership of those works of art in a digital way. Now, it's interesting to say, Caryn, and you know enough about art and artists, and I know we may have some artists joining us today. The idea of an NFT, it relates in some ways, at least for us who are historically trained in art, to work by artists like Lcokwood, where you're kind of owning the concept of the work of art. It's separating the actual art object from the entity itself. So I like to relate to it as a sort of, as a parallel to things like Lcokwood. And everybody's read a wonderful Forbes article about this recently. It calls upon it. So yeah, Sotheby's has recently sold some NFTs. Christie's also recently sold an NFT that sold for an incredible value, $69 million after a bidding war by an artist known as Beeple. Beeple was largely unknown by folks like me who sell artists at auction every day in, day out. But interestingly, Beeple's now the third most expensive living artist on earth. It is really, really an extraordinary thing that he was otherwise unknown to experts in the area until a few weeks ago. So I will say it's something where the auction houses have tried to adapt very quickly. Shortly after Christie's sale, Sotheby's is now partnered with Artist Pack to do a series of NFT sales. I think we'll increasingly get into the area over the months that come due to enormous appetite and the rise in cryptocurrency. I think for everyone who is dealing with clients in the area, we'll go on to talk on a number of topics today that relate specifically to you all when it comes to planning. But it is an area where there is a significant lack of expertise. And I would say I caution you all to exercise proper due diligence when advising clients around these transactions, to consult experts. And there are not very many of them at this point, although let's hope people are studying the area and are becoming more sophisticated. But needless to say, there are huge sums of money being spent on this. So the due diligence procedures around it should be the same as you would have if you were exercising operating a transaction around $50 million work of art.
Okay, which leads us into who is your client and how will they be taxed? And that really depends upon whether or not your client is a dealer, an investor, or a collector. A dealer, which for a large part is artists are dealers. They're engaged in the sale or business with regularity for income or profit. Anything that is sold by a dealer is subject to is ordinary income, subject to ordinary income tax rates, and that is a 37% rate under current law. An investor is someone who buys and sells for investment rather than personal use and enjoyment. And you will have an investor is going to have to be in the ordinary and course of business to be labeled as such. The interesting thing about collectibles is that they are not subject to preferential capital gains rates. So an investor who buys and sells a piece of artwork or a collectible is going to be taxed on the difference. It will be a capital transaction, and he or she will be taxed on the difference between what he paid for it and what it was sold for. But that will be at the non-preferential capital gain rate of 28%. The collector buys and sells for pleasure. And a lot of our clients out there are collectors They are also not subject to preferential capital gains rates when they sell, but the big difference between being labeled as a collector as opposed to an investor is that the investor is able to deduct against their proceeds of sale the ordinary and necessary expenses of doing business. Now, NFTs are a whole new other universe. Cryptocurrency, which is generally the thing that is used to buy an NFT, is taxed at preferential capital gains rates because it is considered to be a security. NFTs, on the other hand, are not. So NFTs are considered to be collectibles and will be taxed at non-preferential capital gains rates. So the cryptocurrency may be subject to a 20% gain rate, and the NFT probably a 28 collectible rate. Now, this is going to lead to some really unintended tax consequences. So buyer beware, seller beware, and professional beware with respect to your clients. So let's say you buy an NFT with cryptocurrency, and you've held that cryptocurrency for a while, and it has increased in value. So that your buyer at that point is going to have a gain on the cryptocurrency that will be subjected to income tax. For instance, if it was worth the cryptocurrency was worth $100,000 when it was purchased and is now being traded for a thing, an NFT, and it's worth at the time of the transaction $200,000, there is going to be a capital gain tax paid on the difference, a capital gains tax of 20%, excuse me, on the difference. So we're looking at potentially a $20,000 tax there. But if the buyer then flips the NFT and flips it for a profit, the seller now is going to be subject to a capital gains tax on that sale as well, but that will be at the non-preferential rates of 28%. The artist, however, the creator of the LLC, of the NFT, remember, is a dealer, and dealers are not subject to capital gains. Their income is ordinary income, not subject to capital gains rates. It's taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So your artist people, in this particular case, at Christie's, is going to has a huge amount of income to report with respect to that sale. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, as well as Colin, on thinking about what happens when you just try to make your assets disappear.
Colin, I'll let you begin with that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is a process, and it is a lengthy process. And getting started with that process, I think for me, starts really early on in the planning stages. Whether it's seeking the advice of a good lawyer and somebody you trust, and putting together, a trust, and having an appraisal, and having all of your assets sort of in a row, and having a good set of documentation about those things, and sort of thinking about it a little bit in advance of when you're selling, whether it is you're downsizing or you're moving, or all of those things are just so terribly important to get ready. Rebecca and I see a lot of people scrambling very last minute, last second, to sort of to get everything done and ready, and where's all the information and all those files that somebody kept are all at the bottom of a dumpster at some point. So being organized is just so important. I know even for my own self and how I take care of my own little collection, very small, is super important. Labels on the back of things. I have a file with all copies of the receipts and a good appraisal. And of course, communicating to your heirs and your kids and your family about what you want to do. That's really I think anything, communication with your family and heirs, and just keeping that line of communication open with them and letting them know what your plans are, what you'd like to do with things. And when that moment comes, when it's time to sell, have an idea of who you'd like to have in. If you need a large auction house, there's Rebecca Lockwood, and for the smaller market, as Rebecca said, anywhere from the $1,000 to $50,000 market is really our sweet spot here at Stair and Hudson. And we partner with Rebecca a number of things in the past, and that's been pretty successful as well. It's almost like an estate or a house, whether it's a 834 Fifth Avenue or a 2-bedroom on the Upper West Side. It's always a 3-tier cake. There's the very sort of best things, which represent usually the smallest volume and the largest value. And then there's the middle tier, which usually represents the largest volume, and then the medium value. Then there's sort of everything else. And separating those things and not panicking and worrying about what are you going to do with all the clothes and these things. That's the important part. It's a very unusual business, and I make it a point to really listen to clients, what they're worried about, what their needs are. They're usually doing this for the first time in their life, hopefully the last time. Somebody's estate they're helping with, they have a certain amount of time. It's usually triggered by a real estate sale in many cases. And this is something, literally we field 5 calls a day from, okay, I've got this estate and so-and-so has passed away, and all of this pressure, and you try to just calm them down and just say, what's important to you? What are you thinking? This is what we've done in the past. And start to walk them through the stages of, getting an appraisal, and if they need an appraisal, and getting, and looking at what might be a consignment. But so many other things to fit in that, but those are the things that I find so important in the beginning stages of, helping families, other businesses, trusts, is just having those first conversations. Rebecca, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would add that the comprehensive approach is necessary for every estate, no matter which one you're dealing with. It could be, no matter who the client might be, there's always going to be remaining contents, and there's always going to be things that take up more time than the executors or trustees may like, that are worth very little probably. So I would say, knowing who you're working with, and being careful. So the moving van approach that Caryn mentions here on this slide, Sotheby's frequently performs comprehensive estate appraisals for clients who must report personal property on Schedule F of their 706. So we take that exercise extremely seriously, and with the understanding that failure to do so properly could have very painful results, including triggering an audit for our clients. So we do go through this process in a way that is with their best interest and our best interest, which are aligned in mind. That said, we don't serve as a hall monitor for the IRS, and we take direction from our clients and their attorneys and their advisors as to which items are meant to be includable in the decedent's estate. But we do caution clients strongly not to, quote, disappear items in light of the very serious consequences at stake. And the IRS can pursue a decedent's heirs for unpaid taxes, or those heirs to be subject to interest. And important to note, there is no statute of limitations for tax fraud. So we really do look to the advisors and attorneys to reinforce that message of how important it is to be sort of above board in the appraisal process, and we work with you on that. Also, it's important to note, when you're selling unique items, unique works of art, it's very easy to trace their ownership back to the decedent. So when we publish an auction catalog, we publish the provenance of works, and it's very, it's shining light on these things that you would have others maybe wanted to slip through the cracks. These things will come out ultimately, and it may be that you missed the opportunity to step up your basis as of evaluation date of the date of death. So I think it's important to note for tangibles. It's also important to note for NFTs. I would be ill-advised, or I think it would be ill-advised to not plan very specifically around them in your estate, or attempt to transfer them without going through the proper steps. NFTs can really only be accessed by password or personal key with very little exception, even if a court order mandates it. So in order to include your NFT in an estate plan, you have to be absolutely sure that your passcode or your personal key is known and it's passed to the future inheritor. And it's essential that you clearly and explicitly state this as part of your estate plan, how it should be transferred to the beneficiary after your passing. Now, absent these instructions, you do risk the digital asset may not be able to be sold off or liquidated as part of your estate plan as you intended. So I treat it in the same vein as err on the side of being explicit and very direct in your estate plan as you would with the painting. Describe it clearly. Don't try to sort of skirt the rules or let things slip through the cracks.
Which, of course, I see clients all the time, Rebecca, who in the planning process turn around to me and say to me, well, why do I have to actually list these things? Or they come to me, and when I ask them, do you have any collectibles that are, of any particular value? And they look at me and they'll say, well, you're the first attorney who's actually asked me that question. And it's really, really important because these collectibles will not disappear. They just do not disappear. And if they are not correctly reported on an estate tax return, it's going to affect the potential for their sale at a later date. But that's not the only thing that we really have to think about when we're thinking about planning. The art market itself has greatly appreciated in the last 50 years. And we're seeing a lot of collectors who now have millions of dollars in their collection, but they don't have necessarily the liquidity to pay the taxes on them when they die. So we have to think about whether or not they should be given away, sold, or held until death. There are many ways to think about transferring your collectibles. If you sell them, again, you're going to be subjected to some kind of income tax, whether capital gains or ordinary income tax, depending upon if you're classified as a dealer, a collector, or an investor. If you gift it away under current rules, under the current law, your donee, the people you are giving the collectible to, will receive the basis in the property that you have. And that means for the artist, who really has no basis other than the cost of materials, that if they are gifting their property away and it is subsequently sold by the person they're giving it to, there's going to be a whopping income tax if it has if it has appreciated extensively. On the other hand, under current law, and this is maybe perhaps going to change under because the president has proposed otherwise, that if you hold a collectible until death, the basis in that property will be stepped up to its date of death value. And if it is subsequently sold immediately after death, there will probably be no income tax due, whether capital gains at all, on the sale of that assets. But we also, when we're talking about NFTs, we really have to think about how we're going to access them after death. Because remember, an NFT is really just stored on a blockchain like cryptocurrency. It's not something that you can necessarily touch and hold. And in order to access that item, you're going to need to have a private key. And if your heirs don't have that private key to get into it, it can be completely inaccessible after death. Now, ordinarily, when we're dealing with collectibles, we tell our clients to either leave a memo to their executors telling them who they wish certain items to go to, or it is contained in a will or a revocable trust if that's being used as the dispositive document. But you really can't put that private key into your will or trust because it could become a public document after death. And we also have to remember that there's no central directory on the blockchain. The blockchain was purposely decentralized when it was created. So you need to really have an inventory in place when that can be accessible to your heirs. How you create that inventory, whether you use software, whether you use Lori's company, which is a great asset management platform, whatever it is, you really have to make sure that your heirs are going, and your executor are going to have access to the information that they're going to need to actually get to that digital asset.
What I find really interesting about what you just said, Caryn, is that there can be downsides to having an NFT and then having someone access it after you die. But what is so amazing about the structure is that it is completely transparent and the information is in this smart contract. And I think, as Rebecca and Colin both know, if you don't have all that information on a physical piece of art, your object might be devalued very quickly. Or if you are successful in passing it on to the next generation, if all the information isn't there, like the certificate of authenticity, that might limit, your beneficiary's ability to do something with the object. Whereas if the information is passed down properly on the NFT, that is your digital certificate of authenticity, and you don't require all of the information that we think about with physical objects in a traditional market. So I think you're completely right. And there are also huge positives, I think, to the technology as well.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you, Lori. I'd like to also talk about the fact that collectibles by themselves are actually potentially divisible. They can be, when you own a piece of art, or a baseball card even, you have the actual object and you have the intellectual property that goes with it. And so, if you own both, you are able to actually plan each separately. So you can give away the intellectual property and keep the asset, or give away the asset and keep the intellectual property. And what I like to do with some of the artists that I represent is that I have them create an LLC just to own that intellectual property. And then that potentially could be gifted to heirs in a trust. And at that point, the heirs will continue to receive a stream of income coming through. Now, the interesting thing about NFTs, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can potentially benefit heirs sort of like in the same way with an NFT, because when an NFT is created, the creator is able to actually reserve a right to a fractional share of future gains on the property. So that can also become an income stream for the artists going forward.
I mean, to me, I think that's the most exciting aspect of this, is that, we created this company, we created Lobus with my partner, Sarah Wendell Sherrill, who hails from Silicon Valley, and we met at Christie's. And, what really always struck us was this inequity with the artist. And I think what the NFT can do is really change that paradigm where the artist can retain ownership even when their objects are sold. Just exactly to your point. So not only can they retain copyright, but they can also retain like an ownership structure, and that can fund them ongoing. And they don't have like the economic insecurity that many artists feel now, but they will have support from those patrons, know who their community is. So I think that's very exciting, that this creates like a more of an equal playing field in this ecosystem for the artist outright.
And speaking about intellectual property, Lori, it's also really very, very important that the intellectual property actually be registered with the US Copyright Office, because especially in the digital age, when it's so easy to reproduce an image that you can find on the internet, there is no possibility for the owner of that intellectual property to sue for copyright infringement unless there is actual registration. So for the artist who is creating an NFT, it's important not just to retain that fractional share of the future income, it's still the item still has to be registered with the Copyright Office.
That's really great information to know, and something I was not aware of. I mean, now we're talking about inventory. I think, you know, our philosophy from the beginning, or the tenet from the beginning for Lobus, is that people should really own their information. And, you know, I'm going to riff off of what Colin said, which is, you know, many people do still maintain like a Google Doc or a shoebox. And when you're at the point where you need to plan or you need to do something, that's a very difficult way to leverage the information. So with Lobus, we help people, we are an asset management platform. We help people digitize their information and really be able to collaborate on their information with their advisors like Rebecca, like Colin, in like an efficient way. And again, going back to the artist, we really also believe that this is a way for artists to also own their information and be able to have more control over their economic certainty and their careers.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are your records, Lori.
That's it. That's everything. And I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, I'm sure Rebecca and Colin have great stories, or terrible stories, I should say, about people who have been missing a certificate of authenticity and that difficult conversation they've had to have. So I can probably head it over to them for like the downside of not keeping all those records.
Isn't a horror story special, but yes, we have plenty of those terrible tales of clients who spent you know, tens of thousands of dollars in insurance premiums over years and years, assuming that something was correct, and then ultimately was passed down to the beneficiaries, only for them to learn that in fact the expert that perhaps was once in place is no longer issuing opinions. It is it's such a disappointing process, but to your point, it's so important for these reasons to keep these records, and retention is everything. And more than just retention, conversations, recording of living memory of individuals who actually physically acquired the objects, where and when and how they did. All of that is so important. The responsibility lies with their advisors to ask those questions and to get that information down on paper prior to death. I won't speak to any other bad outcomes, but I will say, just be careful and mindful. From our perspective, we always like to notify clients in advance of which authentication committees, before they're submitted, will destroy work or will mark works. Infamously, the Andy Warhol Foundation, when it was still actually authenticating works, would stamp denied on the back. The Chagall Foundation, if you submit works for their consideration, the comité will destroy the work rather than stamp it and return to you. So always be aware of the risks, and read carefully the submission agreements that usually are executed prior to sending a work for authentication first-hand inspection by experts in Paris. The rules differ dramatically based on droit moral countries in the EU versus the United States, which does not really protect the opinions of authenticators. And for that reason, most authentication bodies of artist foundations have closed or ceased to exist.
And I can also say that, Rebecca, I was once involved with a rejection from Sotheby's, simply because the owner of the piece did not follow all the rules that she needed to follow with the taxing authorities in Italy. So it was very difficult to sell, and ultimately it was sold for a fraction of what it would have been sold for on at an auction if it was properly authenticated, had no tax liens on it, and other issues. So it's really important to know where your art is coming from, and to have it authenticated and properly insured, because accidents do happen. Colin, you want to talk about this?
Boy, yeah, it sure does. In my last life, I ran what was called Sotheby's Restoration in the 90s, and I worked there in the 80s and 90s, and I saw just about every single possible mistake happen in terms of overvaluing things, undervaluing things. And for somebody who's really steeped in the decorative arts like myself, and property being damaged, one of a pair of commodes being destroyed, that really do the value of the pair of commodes. So there's so many intricacies to ensuring something properly, and making sure that all of your sales information is documented correctly, and purchase price is recorded. I mean, that's also very, very important. Here in this day and age that we're living in, people are constantly pulling things from our website and provenance, and looking to update provenance on things, and we receive inquiries all the time. I received an inquiry the other day for a painting I sold in 2004, and it's appearing somewhere else in auction, wondering what other information we can supply about that painting. So it is just it's so important to that, to have a good valuation for insurance purposes, and for a collection, and establish a relationship with a conservator. Whether it's or you're doing that through your advisor, or you're doing that on your own. But if you're a paintings collector, you should have somebody who focuses on paintings, and we have a collection. I still run a small, teeny tiny atelier of restores, and we have a collection that we spend 3 to 4 weeks a year at one house, with 2 restorers, 3 restorers, tidying things up, doing condition reports, monitoring the condition of things. So very important.
Just to add to that, people come to us and their main priority to ensure that they digitize or they have all their information is actually location. And that is a variable that is so critical, totally respect the perspective about the condition of the work. And I, having come from Christie's, I thought that was paramount too. And then only to find out we're working with Aon on a pilot, that actually the location of the work is something that they're not updated about at all, and is so critical to their success as underwriters. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that happens all the time. It'd be like, oh, we're going to take this pair of chairs and put them on the plane, or we're taking this dinner service with us, and it changes. I have this, registrar friend, for lack of better words, and there's 3 of them. They just chase this property all over the world, and where it's ended up, and keeping track of that inventory is really important. As I'm sitting here thinking of this, I'm just finished my own appraisal, and I'm thinking, do I have all my locations of where things are in my own house, and what have I missed? This is sort of a wake-up call to recheck all that for my own self. So it is super important. It's like the playbook for your collection, this appraisal document, and they're just so great these days. Rebecca and her team provide the most beautiful ones, and everything is illustrated, dimensions are there, provenance is given. It's just so, it's not an easy thing to do. It takes time, it costs a bit of money, but it's really the best thing you can actually do to keep track of everything. And Lori, I spent some time cruising around your site, and that just takes everything to like a whole nother level, of organization, which is just so important these days.
Well, I like this next topic a lot, because as a person who's now doing a 75-day challenge from TikTok with my daughter, and having to see my son interact with his friends online, I think that this is really fundamental in terms of having this conversation with your heirs, because I don't expect my children to want things that we have. I expect them, honestly, they spend this whole idea about NFTs and about why it's so interesting is because a lot of our children and us too, our digital worlds are so prevalent in our lives right now that before, when we were so focused on curating our physical worlds, like paintings and clothes and cars and everything else, there's now this ability through buying digital art or purchasing these NFTs to have a different group, just like you would go to Art Basel with a certain group, you're now buying CryptoKitties with a certain group. And then you're also really curating your digital life. And I really think that my children will probably have wallets on blockchain that participate in the games they play or the things they do online versus having like, a storage room with art. So I think more important than ever is this discussion of like, do you want the stuff in the house? Like, do you really want this object? Is this something that we need to like think about? And I think that, I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, as kids are thinking of buying fictitious buildings in fictitious worlds, versus, the object on the wall. So that's just my perspective.
Yeah, and I could definitely echo that one to the 10th degree, because as I'm standing in an apartment or a house with somebody and I said, well, and I'm explaining to them that there's a little, there's a dip in valuation in some of the more traditional things and furniture and traditional paintings. And they just can't believe it. And I said, well, have you asked your kids if they're interested? And they're like, well, they don't want any of this. And I was like, well, there is the answer, I'm afraid. My kids know what to do with it, so they'd love it all, and it's a little bit different. But I think it is really, really important to realize that your kids really may not be interested in your lifestyle or the way you do things, or your cotton upholstered sofa or whatever it is. And people get very deeply emotional about things, especially if they've been one or two generations, and they're like, oh, we'll just put it in storage. Worst possible move. That just never works. But if it goes into storage, it should be documented and appraised first. But that's the worst move one can make with the general household thing. My kids will want this. I want to save it for them. They don't want it then. They're not going to want it 10 years from now. It's 99% of the time.
So what ends up happening in a large number of cases when the children don't want it is we end up with fire sales with large collections. And that is really unfortunate. Because it means that the collection is probably going to receive a lot less proceeds coming back to the estate than the estate ordinarily would receive if items could be sold slowly. But that also gets me to charities, because I can't believe how many people I've seen, or how many estates I've helped to administer, where objects have been given to museums or other charities that don't want them, and you end up in the courts basically trying to decide who's going to get what. If something needs to be sold, is the proceeds going to go to charity? So people really need to think about whether or not they're going to be making lifetime gifts to other people, or thinking about charitable gifts. Now, when you give a collectible or a piece of art to a charity, you have to satisfy the related use rule. Otherwise, there is absolutely no charitable deduction. And that means that the object has to be used within the parameters of what the charity does. So if you give a painting to a hospital, it's probably not going to satisfy the related use rule. If you give a painting, on the other hand, to a museum, yes, it will. So you really have to think about not just who you're giving it to, whether or not the charity wants the object, but you also have to think about whether or not the gift that you're making is going to satisfy the related use rule. Now, there are also ways to give fractional interest in a collectible. For instance, I could give a 10% interest over to a museum of a painting, which would allow the museum to hang it on their walls for 36 days out of every year. But the rules were changed back in 2006 so that if a fractional interest in a painting or an other collectible is given away to a charity, that the charity has to receive the balance of that gift within 10 years. And when that gift is made, it's still only going to be at the value that it was on the date of the original 10% gift. So even if it has appreciated substantially, you're still going and say a painting's worth $100,000, now worth $200,000 when you're giving the other 90% to the museum, you're still only going to get a deduction that's based upon the fair market value at the initial gift 10 years prior. So, we also have to think about whether or not charities are also, in many instances, good recipients for appreciated collectibles. We can create a special kind of trust that satisfies the rules set forth in the Internal Revenue Code, usually a charitable remainder annuity or unitrust. And we take the appreciated asset, we gift it over to this trust, we sell the asset in the trust, and then use the proceeds to satisfy the annuity or unitrust interest. And that's a good way of avoiding the capital gains for lifetime giving on highly appreciated collectibles. There's a whole slew of other charitable ways to think about planning with collectibles. I often talk to my artist clients about forming a private foundation, which will allow them to for their legacy to live on, and also to support causes that they want to support, which could be future artists, students, as well as museums, or even the American Cancer Society, whatever it might be. But it's a good way to think about what to do with an artist who has a lot of pieces that would probably cause an estate tax in their estate, but they don't have the cash to really to pay those taxes. So the bottom line is, we really, collectibles are a very special kind of asset that really needs a lot of planning, and I know most attorneys don't really necessarily think about that, but let's talk about the kind of people that your client, who is an artist or a collector or an investor in collectibles, might want to think about talking to. And I think it really it should be a team. We should all be working as a team. So, Colin, do you want to talk about who you like to work with when you put together a team of experts to help your clients?
Well, I think first and foremost, it depends on the collection. I have a Rolodex of different appraisers that do different appraisals. So I've got somebody who's really great who works with antique toys. I've got a great car appraiser if you need one. We can do general household contents and things. I've got somebody who specializes in modern and contemporary art. And of course, when it's appropriate, with a larger auction house for somebody like that. And that's very, very important. Consulting and doing an appraisal, and I've reached out to 3 different dealers today, in fact, checking information about an early 18th century clock by Daniel Quare with no provenance. Nobody could find any information. And does the clock look at by Quare? So that having that team of people, of specialists in your back pocket, and I had the great fortune of working at Sotheby's for 16 years and met so many smart people there, and being able to say, hey, have a look at this and let me know what you think. So the appraisers, of course, like yourself, obviously, and having an attorney advising you what the next steps are, critical. Again, I do this for my own self, and having a great accountant and that having a team of people put together that you trust is again, sort of a critical step in the entire process. But again, building that database and having that appraisal and all that information. I was talking to an antiquities dealer who was here at the gallery today picking something up, and we agreed that in the value of antiquities, provenance can be as much as 95% of the value of something. These were small Loristan things, and we had good provenance for them, and that's why they made and fetched the money that they did. So all day I can account for all of this thing, but that team is really, really important. Rebecca, what do you think? What am I missing
Chime in
here?
quickly to say, in our experience at Sotheby's, we obviously work very closely with various collectors, with different curators, with different dealers, outside experts. All of these people are necessary in order to effectuate a successful sale of property at Sotheby's. I will note when it comes to lawyers, and this is just a shout back to Caryn actually, we deal with many trust and estates attorneys. Not every one of them has worked closely with Sotheby's in the past or has handled a collection that includes art and is familiar with the sort of nuanced issues that are relevant in an art collection. Caryn is one of a few examples, I will say, very small niche of experts who specialize even within that area in handling art. So it is important to actually, if you're able to, work with an attorney who knows sort of the ins and outs of authentication, the risks associated with it, the real meaning behind the reps and warranties in an auction house consignment agreement. There is added value to that expertise. So I look to Caryn as one of those folks who does possess it. So please look for that when you're looking to retain an attorney in the area. And I would say, making sure that you're always using the appropriate expert for the type of object that you're dealing with. And we see so many clients who are retaining a generalist appraiser and they say, oh, well, they can do the jewelry too. And that person doesn't actually own a diamond tester. It is terrifying to see how just generalist expertise in some areas, some people like Colin's team has incredibly broad expertise and can sell all sorts of property, notice tons of different collecting categories in and out. But there are many out there who maybe just specialize in one or two areas. I would caution you not to obtain a value from a Milton Avery from someone who's only an expert in antiquities just because it's the simplest route. Always make sure you're working with the right expertise. And that goes even more so for appraisals you're working on for IRS purposes, USPAP, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. You should always be working with experts who know that particular area of expertise well. So that's my final say on the team.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for the plug. But, you know, I like to work with a lot of different advisors, not just appraisers, financial advisors, but, you know, curators and dealers. I often go to colleagues who have more of a specialty in intellectual property than I might have, because there are so many issues that arise in this space that are so different from your stock account or your house or your bank accounts, or even, you know, your boats and cars. And I also find it so helpful when I have clients who go to somebody like Lori, who put together a wonderful inventory that makes my life so much easier when it's time to administer an estate. So let's talk about where we see the collectible market going. Any comments? I mean, I've been, you know, obviously the NFT space is a big new thing. And that really requires you surrounding yourself with a team of experts because of all the crazy tax issues that are involved, as well as, you know, potential frauds and authentication and a whole slew of issues that go hand in hand. Anybody else want to comment?
I mean, I'm just going to like riff on something Rebecca said, which is that, you know, fairs have gone online and, you know, and auctions too. And while auctions are such a tremendous like event, you know, I think people do want to access culture in a different way. I think that's part of the confluence of why digital art also, I mean, in addition to being accepted by institutions like Christie's and Sotheby's and others, you know, this is a way for people to access a community and access culture and history in a digital format, which all of us have really had to access, you know, over the last year. So I think some of those changes are going to be permanent. I think NFTs are not going anywhere. I think they're going to become more prevalent. I think physical art is going to also merge with this digital format. And I'm so excited to see where it goes. And I'm really excited to see institutions like Sotheby's participate. I know in our prep call, Colin was saying some of his artists are thinking through it. And I think that's really exciting.
I mean, I see our market here and the regional auction house market specifically just was growing last year for us, and there was lots of interest. And when I was working at Sotheby's in England in the 80s, I had somebody, a really great mentor, who really convinced me that a lot of this market is really driven by the real estate market, and people are on the move right now. We have some of the best decorators in the country that are busier than ever, working 10, 15, 20 projects because people were staying at home a lot, obviously. And the home just all of a sudden became so much more important. I saw the prices go up 30% for 17th, 18th, 19th century furniture, decorations, paintings, and the price is getting much stronger. I mean, very selective. It's got to be very clean and neat. So I see the market improving for my range, the $1,000 to $100,000 or $50,000 range, and just getting a little bit better. But boy, you can stick a provenance back on the back of something and say it came from this dealer in 1966. It's just it just adds so much. And again, I keep harping on that, but it did make a difference in the last year. So I'm not sure what this year will bring. There's sort of a pandemic spend also happening. I think Rebecca probably saw that in her market. People were at home and collecting and a little bit like, what else am I going to do here? A colleague of mine told me that there was up to $3 trillion sort of sitting on the sideline that hasn't been spent in the last 14 months. That to me is a fascinating figure, but think about all those guys and gals with Amex cards that aren't swiping in the hotels and restaurants and buying things in the consumerism. I spoke to a great jewelry retailer last night, and he said business was terrible for 9 months. People just were not buying jewelry. That wasn't the popular thing to do. So I see our market rising in just about every category, I think, so.
Rebecca,
so
you
far, so good.
earlier, oh, I'm sorry, Colin.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
I'm good. Thank you.
You alluded to very early on in this hour to the fact that you're seeing a lot more young people
Oh my
that
gosh.
are investing in this area.
The statistics are wild from 2020, I must admit. 69% of all bidders in our online only sales were millennials. And there's a huge wealth transfer coming in the future, not so distant future. They will be empowered with even more spending ability. I cannot wait to see what happens. This means that they've been now introduced to the art market and they're beginning to participate. What will they do when they have additional spending power? We're very excited to see. And as Lori said, I think this is very momentous, this new act of self-definition that art collecting and digital art collecting means, and how folks choose to live now, be it a reflection not just in their physical space, but in their digital and online presence as well. We're all about curating, I guess, a sense of self through collecting art, and NFTs are now part of that definition. I truly do expect that they're not going anywhere. I expect that clients are also now still going to be buying tangible personal properties they always have. Millennials have obviously dipped their toe in at somewhat lower price points, which are the prevalent type of value sold in online only sales, but I think it's marking a huge shift, and we're sort of excited for what the future holds demographically, the increased number of bidders. And I think for Sotheby's, a growing interest in previously marginalized artists as well, which we didn't touch upon, but tons of female artists that were overlooked in the canon, African-American artists that were overlooked in the canon. Now we see people flocking because millennials have an interest in reviving those parts of history that were ignored. So there are other sorts of trends that are that we could go on and discuss for another several hours, but I'll leave it at that.
That's the next panel discussion. Yes.
Yes. I think we've run out of time. If we have any questions, we'll be happy to stay and answer them. If you have to leave, we understand. But do we have any questions, Beth?
We do have a question about NFTs and where you think your businesses will move in the future with the emergence of NFTs.
Well, I can start off. We really see the artist as owner. And we really see the artist as having their own cap table and their ability to really fund and be economically secure. And, just like musical artists, they've distributed NFTs and they've raised funds doing that. Yeah, I think artists are going to be able to do that themselves. And I think they're going to be able to make a decision as to copyright, which Caryn touched on, ownership, which all of us have discussed, and how they want their works to be exhibited and where they want them to be. So we really see the founder or the creator as having more control on the blockchain and with this technology.
I want to echo that, Lori. I think it's really, truly exciting. In a previous life, I worked as an attorney who worked with artists, and to put power in the hands now after resale royalties failed to take off in the United States as an income stream for artists, and they've just been left on the sidelines while collectors have reaped huge return on their works. I think they've created their own table now, at which they sit at the helm. So there is huge opportunity for them there, for the ones that wish to capitalize on it. I'm excited to see what it means, and normalizing the idea of resale royalty within the broader art market. If it does then transfer into the tangible personal property space, I'd be curious to see if this increases their power and bargaining position in that arena as well. So, agreed wholeheartedly.
I can't wait to try this myself personally. As I said the other day to Beth and others, is that I have a friend who's quite an accomplished artist, and he's already just trying to get going and trying to make this work for himself as well. And he's a guy who's struggled. He's been, financially, it's not been easy. Very gifted, talented guy, traditional painter, and he's super excited about this. So I think we'll see more of this, and I can't wait to see if there's a day where I get to sell these myself in my little marketplace. It's pretty cool.
I feel a collaboration coming.
Yeah, so something will happen somewhere,
we do have, we do have
suggest that no artist get involved with this without really consulting an attorney. I think it's really important.
That's a good idea.
Because it's still a very unregulated market. There are all kinds of tax issues. I mean, something I didn't bring up before, but that, if you sell your NFT and you want to donate the proceeds to charity, you have another potential income tax issue, just converting the cryptocurrency into cash, because the charity is probably not going to accept the cryptocurrency. So there's all kinds of taxable events that happen. There's all kinds of potential fraud issues, intellectual property issues. I think the artist really has to be very careful about moving into this space, as long as it is still the wild, wild west that it is.
More now than ever, it would seem. More now than ever.
I saw something where someone asked about resources. There's a site called Crypto Art, which I think is really interesting. It speaks to the top 5 marketplaces for NFTs, and you can really see what the values are over time. I just think that's interesting because it's data driven, and I like data, and there's a lot of information around it, but you can actually see it. So I like that site. I refer to it. I think it's pretty interesting.
Anything else, Beth?
Well, we do have a question about the mistakes, the top 10 mistakes, and whether you have experience with people who've made some of them. How can we help that person, regain the value of their art? If you've made mistakes, can you backtrack?
Hopefully, yes. Okay, by seeing the right experts who can help you deal with the mistake you've made. If for instance, I can't tell you that anything is, you're going to cure your mistake if you park the moving van in your driveway and you get rid of all your stuff before you file the tax return, because that's just going to cause issues later on if you want to attempt to sell these things. So eventually you're going to have to report these items to the IRS in order to ensure that you can get their value. So, you know, the bottom line with going through, as we're going through these mistakes, is that you have to surround yourself, whether you're an artist, a dealer, or, you know, or an investor, with a team of professionals who can guide you in the right direction so you don't make those mistakes.
And it's never too late to undertake an appraisal. And I mean, if you're living, do it. I would encourage you, even if you feel like you've waited too long and, oh, you've lost paperwork, there's no time to start like the present. I would encourage that strongly. And Lori's huge assistance here. I mean, we really, I see clients who've never had an appraisal done and they come to us in their 80s doing estate planning with their attorney. And maybe they did an estate plan, wrote a simple will 20 years ago, and they left one painting to one child and another painting to another child. And the values are completely, you know, differentiated at this point by a huge gulf. It's a completely unfair estate plan. I mean, you would think it's too late. It's not too late to have that conversation. We see folks come to us and ask for us to do a lot of research on their behalf, simply because they maybe lost paperwork. We can take proactive steps. There's lots that can be done technologically, even from this point, from an authentication point of view, with now microscopic technologies that have advanced in the last few years. If anybody's watched the recent documentary on Knoedler, the Knoedler case on Netflix, I highly encourage it to see how technology now plays into authentication procedures. So that wasn't something you could even do 20 years ago. And here we are finding ourselves semi-chemists in a laboratory at Sotheby's doing evaluations of art at this level. So I would say it's never too late.
I was very surprised when I watched that documentary to find out that there was actually a lab underneath the building on York Avenue to deal with these issues.
Exactly.
Anything else?
No, that is it for tonight. We do have a session 2 on Friday with 2 new speakers. You can register at pierrolaw.com/events, and that's at 12 to 1 o'clock. Please let everyone know and spread the word.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you, everyone.
Thanks, Caryn. Thank you so much for having me.
You're
Yeah,
very
thank you.
Thank you, Caryn. Thanks, everyone.
welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.